Charles and his wife Nellie Metcalf had 4 children: Clara, Edith, Florence, Ruth. 2 other girls died early in life from consumption. So they actually had 6 children altogether. George Albert Metcalf had 2 children, George and Clara. Young George was the youngest judge appointed at that time in Manitoba. Thomas Llewellyn remained unmarried. My mother Clara met my father Roderick Chisholm Davison during the First World War. My father had joined the Army and later transferred to the Royal Flying Corps. It's interesting to note my grandfather Charles, this is in addition to going back to the Sandy Mount, built a cottage in Delta, and I tell you this while it comes to mind. At Lake Manitoba, he also named it Sandy Mount after the Rogers homes both in Dublin and St. Thomas. Mary Smith, my great aunt, came from Ayrshire, Scotland, married an Alan Smith and settled at Poplar Point, Manitoba. My great aunt Mary, it seems, was sister to my great grandmother. They had a falling out years ago, but finally got back together years later and settled their differences.
Do you know what they were?
My great-grandmother came from Chicago with her family and traveled to Port of the Prairie for a family get-together. There was a photo of all the members. About 30 people took place, and the photo was taken on the beach at Delta, Manitoba. I can remember sitting next to my cousin Allensworth, who was only about 7 at the time, and I remember it so vividly. Unfortunately, I don't know where the photograph went. Aunt Mary and Uncle Al, my great Aunt Mary and Uncle Al, had a daughter named Edith. Edith married Fred Smith, and after his demise, she moved to Vancouver to live with the Fitzgeralds, who were cousins to both our families. I can remember visiting with Carol and Barry Fitzgerald in the 1970s. Carol and Barry had a daughter and son, and unfortunately the daughter was killed in a traffic accident on the way to Whistler. I have no idea where the whereabouts of the son is. My mother Clara, daughter of Charles and Nellie Metcalf, met my father during World War I, and they married and had 2 sons, Roderick Charles, 1922, and Donald Wollicott, 1927. My brother Rod was with the RCNVR, which was the Royal Canadian Navy, as a lieutenant on the ship, the Mount Royal, which was a minesweeper. Post-war, Rod studied for medicine, graduated and practiced, went back to medical school, and graduated again from the Ford Foundation Hospital in Detroit as an ear, nose, and throat specialist. Rod married Doris Biscard, and I'm not sure of the spelling on her name, but they had 3 children, Roderick Chisholm, Carla, and Janice. Don, myself, joined the War Assets Corporation at the end of the war, and eventually went into sales and sales management. Don married Barbara Whitworth, and they had 3 children, Camille, Don, firstborn. Took physiotherapy for a career, worked in Winnipeg, and eventually followed Don and Barbara to Victoria. Camille married John Teague, May the 1st, 1987. They had 4 children, Simon, 1988, Brittany, 1991, Nicola, 1994, and Patrick, 1993. Sharon Deirdre married Don Trosham in Winnipeg in 1976, and they had 3 children, Aaron, 1982, Andrea, 1984, and Kristen, 1986. The family lived in Winnipeg, Whitehorse, and currently reside in Calgary. Donald Mark, my son, went into the Anglican ministry and graduated in 1992. Married Lynn Sitterman from Winkler, Manitoba.
Not Altona.
And eventually their endeavors took the position. Mark's endeavors took him to a position with the Brentwood Chapel here in Greater Victoria. The Davisons, originally from Inverness of the Highlands of northern Scotland, they migrated to West Virginia in the early 1800s, as the other side of the family did. A portion of the Davisons moved up through Halifax, Nova Scotia, at the time of the American Revolution. Some remained in Halifax. The balance traveled west to Quebec City and Toronto. Our family of Davison started with my grandfather of Quebec City, born in 1849, married Kate Sophie Hetherington in 1883, and they had two children, Roderick Chisholm Davison and his sister Isabella. Family attended the Old Trinity Church in Lower Quebec. My grandfather died at an early age, leaving his wife Kate a widow. It seems a gentleman traveler from Winnipeg who sold hardware by the name of Robert Hayward met Kate and children in Toronto. Robert was a widower with 5 or 6 children, and he married Kate and took Kate and my father and my aunt to Winnipeg to live in a house that was located behind the Hudson Bay store where the cenotaph is now located. My father, Rod, joined the military in World War I, as mentioned, in 1916 as a lieutenant in the 223rd Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Force, called Winnipeg Rifles. He later transferred to the Royal Flying Corps, Canadian, where he used his talents as an instructor at the Portage la Prairie Air Force Base. During the latter part of the war, he met and married my mother, Clara Metcalf, in 1920. My father died on May the 8th, 1948, followed later by my mother, Clara, on November the 23rd, 1974. My father had cousins in the United States still at that time, but it was my mother who corresponded with them, and the one who really stays in my mind is the fact her favorite was a captain of a steamship or a paddle wheel on the Mississippi, and they developed quite a correspondence back and forth. My Aunt Bella, she married Guy Proud. He was a banker, and they lived in Edmonton, Chicago, and San Francisco. Guy died in the early 1950s, and Bella stayed in California until the 1960s, eventually moving to Winnipeg to live with my mother and her 2 sisters, Florence and Edith. Bella died at the Tuxedo Villa in Winnipeg in 1983, at 92 years of age. Now, these are mostly footnotes, so bear with me. Due to ill health developed in the late 40s, my father, Rod, had to take early retirement in 1937, yes. He purchased 160 acres of farmland in the Kerry area of southern Manitoba, and flax was the main crop grown, as the oils were used very readily in manufacturing. He worked the farm for 4 to 5 years, contracted out all the harvesting. To live on the farm, he purchased an old log home from St. Pierre, Manitoba, had it hauled by tractor, and put on concrete pads. The walls of the house, being an old house, were 2 feet thick and filled with mud and logs. So it was actually a settler's house. He refurbished it inside and out with false log siding inside, and then an ordinary wall paneling or siding on the outside. Then to live there, of course, he had to become independent. So he had a very large reservoir dug and filled by bypassing the water from the ditches. He then passed it through a sand pit to be partially purified, and then again it passed into a framed water holding pit. There was a 20-foot tower with which was built on the pit, the 20-foot pit, and a 100-gallon tank mounted on the top and hooked to the water line to the house, so that my job every day was to pump the water from the well to the gravity, and to gravity feed the taps into the house, so my mother had running water inside.
How long did it take you to pump it?
Not for 100 gallons isn't much. It takes muscle.
Yeah.
He also dug a hole beside the house, planked in the sides, and had ice blocks cut from the reservoir, packed into the hole with straw, and it created a cooling system and refrigeration for summer use. My dad also, being excellent in sports, hockey, lacrosse, etc., also loved to shoot ducks and geese. When he became sick, he used to drive close to the marshes, sit in the car, and fire at them as they flew over.
So he never got out of the car?
He was also with somebody who was able to recover the birds. Using the car, by the way, now, the bylaws are definitely against having a firearm in the car. I hope you have found some interest about what has turned out to be an interesting background to me. The facts are fairly close, and if there's any discussion further, please contact me and I'll try to find out.
So can you tell the story about the cow, the bull that you raised in Tuxedo?
Oh, yeah. Well, in the wintertime, because my father was sick, we decided that we would stay in town because the facilities, it was just after the war, and he wanted to start breeding with cattle.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided the way to start was to get a bull. So he went out and bought a bull, and then the weather got so bad we couldn't get it down. He was going to leave it at our cousins on a farm, by the way, Hayward's, a few farms over, and they were going to raise it. But we couldn't get down there because of the weather, so we took it and we tied it up in the basement, put straw down there, and that bull lived in the basement for at least a week. you know who did this?
Yeah.
And to get him down there, actually, my brother and I carried the bull out to the car, lashed up, got him in the trunk, propped the back trunk lid open, secured it so he could breathe, and we got him down to the farm. And eventually, after all that, my dad sold him. We also raised chickens in the basement and pheasants.
In Tuxedo?
In Tuxedo. And that was my job also. And we would take them down to the farm and release them, the pheasants particularly. The eggs were supplied by the University of Manitoba, as a matter of fact.
Huh.
So it goes on and on and on.
So then did your dad hunt the pheasants after you released them?
No, we didn't have to release them. The biggest ones we had, the biggest lot, we built a special cage. And the neighbor had cattle and unfortunately wandered onto their property. And they ripped the cages open, so my father populated southern Manitoba with pheasants.
That's incredible. And were you ever the person that had to retrieve the ducks that your dad shot from his car?
Who was it?
Were you ever one?
No.
No, okay.
No, I didn't like shooting.
No,
It bothered me a bit. He and I were 100% equal in most of our things, sports and everything else, but when it came to shooting, no.
Yeah.
No, that's more like my son-in-law, Don Trosham.
Yeah, you'd think they were related.
Yeah. There you go.
Nice work.
I don't think I've missed anything. How long was that?